Textbooks are not the enemy. Welcome back to Be Good Leadership, everyone. Of course, where we're talking about leading, teaching, and learning to create better school communities. So today we're going to talk about textbooks are not the enemy. And this is I don't think it's a controversial thing to say, but in many school communities, it would be. And especially there's a different trend that's coming in over the years that textbook learning is what we want to avoid. And I remember being at a professional development and, it was a conference and there was many cognitive science there and cognitive scientists there, and they were doing some presentations. And I remember afterwards having just a conversation with one of them saying he had worked with, I think his name was David Myers, who wrote a book on a textbook for AP psychology. And he said that it's amazing to me that teachers don't use these textbooks, which are usually developed by educational psychologists and cognitive science, to assist learning. And I realized early on when I had that it was true. As I learned about cognitive science, as I learned about things like retrieval practice, spaced repetition, when I learned about differentiated questioning, all these kinds of things, I started to realize, most of those things are already inside of a textbook if you know how to use a textbook correctly. And I want to say there's no evidence that textbooks hurt learning. And when actually researching, I love to research autodidacts, and I love hearing about how people go about learning in particular topics, especially something where they're not a professional in, but they decide, hey, I'm going to really do a deep dive into this. And I'd heard a podcast with Andrew Huberman where he talked about his process of going through learning something new when he wanted to really deep dive. And Andrew Huberman is a professor of neuroscience and has a very popular podcast, Huberman Podcast, but he was talking about how he goes about learning something new. And he talked about, he tries to find the most widely used textbooks, the most dependable textbooks in that particular field. Okay. This is a college professor, expert. I'm looking for a good textbook. Ultra Learning, a good book called Ultra Learning, and other books I've read about autodidacts. Autodidacts tend to do the same thing. They try to find what are some of the most widely used text. What are some of the most popular textbooks in this particular field and topic? Why? Because a single professor is not a dependable representative of any particular topic. Why aren't they dependable? Because they bring their own biases in. They bring their own niche things that they are interested in. When we're trying to get a general sweep of a field, when we're trying to develop a base of knowledge about a particular field, we want the base of knowledge that is most agreed upon by most people. There might be some things that are still up for debate, but generally a textbook is the history of what we know so far. In that particular field, the textbook is trying to convey the most uncontroversial collection of information, especially in science, especially in when it just comes to language arts, where it's a lot of stories and everything else. But we're providing this base. And what we've done in education is we have allowed, by going away from any kind of textbook, and I'm not saying only depending on the textbook, but I'm saying in many places, we don't use textbooks at all, or I don't do the textbook, or this, that, and the other. What we end up doing often is allowing bias to creep in, and it's always going to creep in, but we allow bias to creep in at such a monumental level. And I'm not a political person, so this could be a conservative bias, it could be a liberal bias, whatever it is you want. It could be just this particular teacher doesn't know that much about this field, and basically what they end up learning is stuff they research online, right? They're looking up stuff because, I'm not supposed to use a textbook, so I'll just look something up online. And do they fact check that? That's a whole use of time that's probably better spent in other areas. And what you find is when I do comparative analysis of different school systems, America seems to be the one most adverse. The American system seems to be the one most adverse towards textbook. And I don't know why. And I wish that we could do it differently, because they have so many benefits. Once again, I'm not saying that you should only teach the textbook. A good teacher is also going to pull in other resources. They're going to use the textbook. The teacher's edition is a great, the teacher's edition of most textbook are really helpful for a new teacher who has just coming out of oftentimes educational programs that don't really focus on pedagogy, focus on kind of more like philosophy, if you will, where the textbook or teacher's edition oftentimes give you a model or an exemplar of what would probably be a pretty good lesson on how to teach this particular topic. And one could use the teacher's edition of a textbook very well in the first couple of years of teaching a new topic or teaching in a new field to help them become a better teacher and develop their own style, right? And add their own things to it. Of course they would. And oftentimes I'm going to get into 6 ways in which and 6 reasons why the textbooks are not our enemy, and that any school community should not be hesitant to find a good, dependable textbook to be able to provide their teachers with and the students with. So here we go. 1, structured and consistent. Talked to Ari a lot. Most textbooks these days are aligned to your curriculum, and they're sequential, which we know there's a huge benefit to something aligned with standards that are already there and have a sequential basis of study, especially when it comes to math, science, even history to a large extent from what we're seeing. And history is the one usually most controversial when it comes to textbooks because there's a political bent to any history that a country is teaching its students. But in general, though, they help in that it allows for a structured and consistent guide that goes usually along with the curriculum. It's clear this topic and some of the exercises that we're going to be doing around this unit are tied to these particular curriculum standards. Some people aren't looking at their curriculum standards, and sometimes having to create something that goes along with it, at least the research seems to suggest, if you put that all in a teacher's hands, 1, not all teachers are competent in that way to do that to a high degree. And the other is that it seems to be one of the least bang for your buck activities you could have teachers spend their time doing. So they allowed for a structured and consistent curriculum alignment and a sequential learning. 2, they have built-in differentiation. Many textbooks have resources, and even within the textbook itself, leveled questions. There's multiple resources that you can use for kids who have different rates of learning and different rates of uptake in their working capacity. Most textbooks come with those. They come with these additional resources that the teacher doesn't have to go and find. They're there. And they come already inside. Oftentimes, many of the sections and the units within have leveled questions. That here's an easier one. That the questions get harder as you go, become a little bit more sophisticated. They're critical thinking questions. Those things are in there. You don't have to go looking for all of them. You can look for additional ones, but at least there's a base here where we can start here. We can start here, and maybe they can also help teacher develop their own over time. 3, evidence from research. Most meta-analysis find that there's benefits to student outcomes, especially in math, science, and reading for those kids who are using textbooks in their classrooms. This comes through very strong in math, science, and reading. And I think the reasons for it are that the repetitions in math, what it allows for in science, the sequential learning, to be able to go back and forth. Also in the reading, there's ready-made questions, sometimes, grammar stuff, everything else. But what it does is it also allows for retrieval practice within. And it also allows you to have just a consistent basis of what we're learning, what I can go back to, what I can look at. And it's not over here, over there, over there, over there. I know what's coming. And I know the base of what we're doing. And if I add other resources onto it, I know what they're being added onto. So I know what to connect it back to each time. Number 4, supports teachers, clear guidance, and time efficient. It helps with, in terms of just thinking capacity. Teachers thinking about what resources they're going to be using, how they're going to do this, coming up with every idea on their own for every single unit, every single year is not a good use of time not a good use of teacher time. A text adds to something. It helps with the mental capacity. It helps give some guidance to a teacher of what probably needs to be covered over a course of time. It gives a teacher a better chance of making sure they're going to give a base of knowledge that's equitable to all students over the course of a year, rather than, I'm just going to end up doing what I like. Just going to do what I know a bit more of. I'm tired right now, so I don't know. You're tired? Okay, let's stick with the text mostly, because you don't have to do much planning about that. Right? You don't have to do much new planning about resources and everything else if we got a text with us. When those times get a little bit tough, okay, we're back to the text. But then the text also is a jumping off point. So you're not using your mental capacity to come up with something completely fresh and new. And it's time efficient. It supports teachers who are already going to be very busy. Sadly, though, many teachers have been made to feel and gaslighted that depending on using a textbook, looking at the teacher's edition for ideas about developing lessons and everything else is like not good teaching, or is I should be doing something different. They've been gaslighted into this, and it's not fair to them. And there's no research behind that as well. 5, accessibility. It's stable and predictable, man. Stable and predictable. You know what's coming on. It's accessible. It's made to be accessible to the kids who are on level. And like I said earlier, there are resources and different things that can help with differentiated learning. It also crosses the digital divide. It's something that they can look at, something they can use. It helps parents support their kids. I've had so many conversations over the years with parents that we're wondering, is there a text that could be sent home? So many times, working with parents from different countries, especially, who are like, is there a text that can go home? Is there something that I can see where I can also maybe see if I can support? So not every parent can support their kid, but what about the parents who want to? What about those parents who want to actually help if they had some kind of resource to look at? And oh my Lord, I worked with so many people who their answer to this now is that, don't worry, we've sent them all these links. They can go to this resource. They have so many options of resources. Man, I think that is with its best intention. But oftentimes when you just this link, that link, it overwhelms people. It also, they don't know which one is more important than the other. And you can't have consistency and accessibility across, and it's not predictable. Well, what are you going to use for this unit? What are you going to use there and there and there? The text allows that. Across teachers, if you have a team of teachers, I mean, they can teach in a very different style. They can have different styles. They can have different ways they go about that. But at least what we can tie back to is that in this third grade team, this is what they're learning and covering. This is the base. At the bare minimum, this is what they're learning, covering, and understanding. And each teacher teaches a little bit different. They add their little flavor to it, and that's what's expected. That's the autonomy. But there has to be that autonomy across, with some accessibility and some rules and some predictability, right? And they're going to do different things. There's only so many notes in music, but there's lots of different music. There's only so many punches in boxing, but there's lots of different styles of boxing, right? It's the same thing in education. If we can provide, here's this text, here's this resources, there's this resource, the autonomy is going to be there. They're still going to do different things with it, but at least we have this base as accessible also to support for our kids who maybe don't all have the digital devices when they get home, but also for our parents who want to help support them, because why not support them? All right. And then 6, last but not least, but over and again, especially in math and language arts, starting elementary, going through middle school, math and language arts, kids score higher in math, who have access to textbooks, as well as in language arts, because the language arts provide grammar, vocabulary, and comprehension components consistently. Because throughout, oftentimes, language arts textbooks, there are those things that sometimes as a teacher, I might not want to do so much of. I don't feel so competent teaching grammar, or I don't like to teach grammar. I don't like to teach vocabulary. It's okay. Here's some stuff that's already built out for you. Here's some things that students can work on. Here's some things that a parent could help a student with. Parent can do some learning as well. The same thing in math. There's a consistency across of we're going here, we're going sequentially, we're building up that base. Here's more reps and practice. And oftentimes in so many math texts, there's so much retrieval practice, so much access to different types of problems that they could practice, as well as access to spaced repetition built into these, where they're going to ask in the text, in the math text, they're going to ask about some problems that you did from a unit before and try to mix that in. And we know that that's beneficial to have to recall and practice again something that's older that you haven't practiced in a few weeks if we're going to have long-term learning. I started off by saying textbooks are not the enemy, and they are not. They are not an evil thing. And I do think that in the American system, especially American International Schools, American public schools, where we have sort of gone away from that, we're unnecessarily demonizing a tool that is actually very beneficial. Beneficial to students, beneficial to parents who want to support their students, and beneficial to busy teachers who would just like a resource that they can depend on, a resource that they can base some decisions on, a resource that they can use without feeling bad about it when, man, other things, they're burnt out. They can't put everything they have into everything else. A textbook can help. A textbook is dependable. There's too much research behind it that says they actually are helpful. They're definitely not the enemy. Let's be responsible. Let's see if we can invest. Hope this has been helpful. You guys have a wonderful day and be good.